This is an after-school program podcast.
Welcome to the Home Studio Hangout podcast, where we explore what it's like building, running, and working out of a home studio with your hosts, Joshua Matotek, Andrew Simmons, and many guests in different areas of the music industry.
And welcome back to the Home Studio Hangout podcast with your boy, Drew, and your other boy.
Dude, if you ever do that again, I'm quitting. It's not going to be the Home Studio Hangout. It's just going to be the Home Studio because you're going to be all alone.
The Home Studio.
Sponsored by Aha Sparkling Water.
Yeah.
Just kidding. We can't get a sponsorship if we wanted one.
I know.
Well, we do want one. That made no sense. I'm tired. It's 10 o'clock.
Yeah, it's your boy Drew, and it's your other boy Josh, hanging out on a Tuesday night. This is the Home Studio Hangout at night, chilling.
It's like Nick at Night, but without George Lopez waking you up at 3 a.m.
with a lowrider.
Dude, I feel like do they still play?
They have to, right?
I hope that they do, because if not, that means there's an entire generation of kids who don't know. Well, actually, no. Here's the deal. Even if they did, most kids are watching Netflix anyway.
Exactly, dude. No one's watching TV at the middle of the night like that. People have been watching anime. I am one of those people.
I'm one of those people. What are you watching right now?
I'm rewatching Shippuden.
Very nice. I still need to finish it. I'm almost through it. But I like to really pay attention to Naruto because of how advanced the character development is.
Mm-hmm.
So I have to be in the right headspace to watch that show. Lately I've just been picking random animes and they're just background music while I
nice.
Screw around on my phone.
Nice.
But I went on a documentary kick again because my taste in television is anime, documentaries, and early 2000s silly comedies,
slapstick comedy stuff.
Yeah, and 90s stuff, anything all the old Adam Sandler stuff is just
heck yeah,
so perfect to me. So
I've been reading this book. I've been going through Power of Habit.
Very nice.
It's been recommended to me by so many people. So I've had it for a while also. But yeah,
that's I need a Maddie gave me a whole book on the extra lore of Kakashi. So I gotta read that, and then I have a book on existentialism that I gotta finish too.
There you go. And that minimalism book.
Yeah, I have so many books I need to read.
Dude, heck yeah. We'll get through them one day. Today we're talking about one of Josh's current favorite subjects. I think I've heard you talk about this more, and you've texted me about this more than I think anything else other than maybe hyperpop snares.
I never text you about hyperpop snares because I found all my hyperpop snares. shout out to Umaru.
Yeah, and I will say this is probably one of the most talked about subjects between the two of us.
Well, not only that, but I see it everywhere too.
Dude, people talk about it so much. It's one of the most talked about forum topics for sure.
Yeah, I feel 99% of the time I see people talking about gear, it's always about what preamp should I use with this microphone and XYZ.
Exactly. So today we're going to be talking about vocal chains. Kind of gear related, but kind of, I don't know. It's going to be a little bit of gear, a little bit of mindset, a little bit of approach from each of us, because we both approach things a little differently. And then we also have some instances of some other people that we've worked with or seen work that do different things from what we do for, kind of similar ideas, approach, or end goal, goal in mind. So firstly, maybe for those who are newer that don't kind of understand what we mean, What's a vocal chain, Josh?
Vocal chain is whatever comes between your microphone and your converter.
And your microphone being a part of that vocal chain also.
Yep. It's the whole kit and caboodle. And so like, I feel like there's always like everybody has their thing, you know, like Benny Blanco says he always uses a Manley Ref C into a Chandler TG2 into an 1176. And it's just like, that's what works for him. And that's what he'll always use. You know, the C800 BAE 1073 and a CL1B is like super popular in hip hop. It's like one of the most tried and true chains out there. And then you have some things where some people will just run directly into their Apollo. Some people will have an EQ and use 2 compressors instead of 1. So like there's a lot of different things that people do, and there's different like approaches and reasons behind it all.
Yeah. So one aspect I kind of want to touch on up front, because you do this, a mix of these two, but a lot of the stuff you just mentioned is mainly analog gear. But I will say that a vocal chain doesn't necessarily have to just be like hardware analog gear, or hardware in general. It could also be, especially if you have an analog audio system or a universal audio system,
Apogee now too,
or an Apogee. Yeah, they have the digital mixer boards or consoles. That's what they're called. The digital consoles within the system itself that allows you to record and or monitor a vocal chain or a chain in general without using your computer's DSP, or it uses the DSP from the interface, making it, I mean, every time I've used it, it's been ridiculously fast. I've never had an issue of latency. I think you do more than me too.
Yeah, no, because all these interfaces are based on Thunderbolt, like you're down to almost 0 latency. And then the ones that aren't Thunderbolt are typically like PCIe cards. So,
and even then, those are crazy fast too. There's my buddy Shane, who we had on the podcast, one of the drum guys that we had on. He tracks drums through a PCI card.
That's what our studio has.
Yeah, it's really sick.
Yeah, he has the Lynx card, and it's just superior. But like, you know, Thunderbolt's so fast that it's essentially the same thing. That's why like you can use external GPUs and stuff now. Yeah.
So yeah, this also we'll kind of touch on both. And I think you kind of have a mixed system, from what I understand. You kind of have like, depending on where you are, dependent on what you use, but you have a system that kind of utilizes both. So let's kind of start with generally what is the beginning of the chain. So that's the microphone, first thing and foremost, right? Microphone, first thing and foremost. We're not going to talk too much about this because the first episode of this podcast, we did like an hour and 45 minutes on just microphones. Deep dives on microphones, what the capsules are, like different types, why you would need them, recommendations for stuff. I think Josh might have actually changed some of his recommendations. Josh, if you want to talk about your a quick journey through your microphone journey.
Lewitt is the only microphone brand that matters. And it's not the microphone I'm talking into right now.
Yeah.
But yeah, Lewitt all the way. After comparing all these different options, I ended up buying a Lewitt LCT 840. One, because it was a third of the price of the 2 microphones I was considering. And 2, because it was probably the safest yet also like most done sounding microphone that I could find. It has a very sparkly top end for the pop music, but it doesn't have like a lot of sustain in the top end and it's not super saturated. So we actually ended up using it over a real Telefunken 251, which is a $10,000 microphone, and the Lewitt was only $1,000. Just because it's safer and a little bit of EQ, and it's just as good, if not better, depending on what the application is.
I feel like in the situation that we used it, which was a pop, rap, hip hop vocal, it got the desired effect at the microphone while not being too bright like the Telefunken sometimes can be on certain words or phrases or things like that, or certain voices. And if we wanted it to be any brighter, to kind of match the similar top end of the Telefunken, just use a little analog EQ on the top of it, and it kind of just opened it right up in a similar way.
So what I noticed is like whenever you're kind of pushing everything, it maintains its high end transients easier. So I really like it about that microphone. I used it on screaming vocals, and I don't know where I screwed up in the vocal chain because I was running a pretty clean preamp. So I can't tell you if it was my tube compressor or if it was the microphone that was distorting, but it sounded terrible. But also the vocalist had a really weird voice where they just had like a hole in their frequency.
Oh, really?
Range of their voice. Yeah, like it was like your typical vocal kind of like peaks and then it dips and then it comes back up. Mm-hmm. His was doing that, but then at like 1.5K, it just like pulled out.
That's weird.
He had like a hole in his voice. I couldn't really feel it.
That's really weird.
It was probably just the vocalist.
Yeah. But definitely for singing, and if you want, I mean, like you said, it's what, $1,000?
Yeah, it's only $1,000.
That's crazy.
Like a $10,000 mic.
Yeah, so yeah, that's a steal by comparison, and to have the flexibility and everything. But I don't want to go too deep into microphones for sure. Yeah. But I know Josh, from episode 1 to this would be episode 39. Josh has made a large, massive journey through testing and trying out a bunch of different stuff, and went through.
And I'm like, I literally can't be happier with it. Like, I have no intention of getting, like another microphone unless if like I'm just making buku bucks and I can afford to get like a C800.
Yeah, it's more of a flex mic.
Right, so like I just don't see a point in getting anything else.
Exactly. And, you got your workhorse mic.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that, so first things first, starting at the microphone, and then generally what comes next in the vocal chain, Josh? We got to get that microphone up.
The preamp.
Yeah, we got to get that microphone up to gain level.
I feel like I'm watching Dora the Explorer right now.
We got to get that microphone up to gain level, and we talked about this a little bit. I think we talked about this a little bit in that episode, but there is like a certain amount of gain that is required from microphones to get to the next section, which is like compressors and EQs, to get those to read the microphone. You have to get that gain up, because I think we did talk about this, because if you've ever tried plugging a microphone directly into a compressor, it's just not going to work. There's not going to be anything. Nothing's going to happen. But also, in the instance of your mic, you'll need phantom power. So all of that will happen in the preamp. What preamps are you landing on right now as far as hardware goes? We'll talk about software in a second.
So right now, when I'm at home, I just use my Apollo. So I got the mic out of the way, so I'm currently trying to put together a vocal chain. If it was up to me, I would just get a normal rack, but because I'm traveling a lot, I want to get a 500 series unit, which is smaller. And so that's where I'm running into issues, because all of the pieces that I want typically only come in a full 19-inch rack.
Yeah, and I was going to say, so to explain the 500 series stuff, because I actually didn't know about the 500 series stuff until I worked at a larger studio. So most of the time when you see rack stuff, it's like the big, wide rack, what you think of as rack gear normally, big left to right, probably like 1.5 feet or something, foot long.
They're 19 inches long.
Yeah, 19-inch long. Pieces of gear, and they're generally like 1 or 2 rack spaces, tall. The 500 series are like, I don't know.
Tiny.
They're like less than 6 inches. They got to be less than 6 inches. They're
Yeah, I have one up on my computer. I'm gonna look at the
look at the dimension. But they're so instead of being horizontal, they're actually vertical, which is really cool. And what they do is they can put a lot of the same components from these larger scale pieces into a more compact system, especially for people that are working from home like a lot of us are. This is a game changer, dude, because you can buy, you may not want to have this huge desk full of all of these massive pieces of rack gear. The 500 series allows you to buy a lunchbox. A bunch of people make them. Essentially, a lunchbox is just like a box that powers the 500 series units.
Yeah.
And allows you to connect to them. And yeah, you can slot in, mix and match a bunch of different types of pieces, and it's super cool.
It's really cool. And then the racks themselves are like a whole nother rabbit hole because you have all the different routing options, there's stereo linking capabilities, there's all kinds of cool stuff. By the way, they're 5.25 inches high.
That's crazy small.
1.5 inches wide.
That's crazy small.
Yeah, they're pretty dope. So yeah, it's one of those things where like you're able to basically build the perfect chain as long as like those same things are available. Like basically what I was planning on purchasing was just a BAE 1073 running into a distressor. I can't find a good clean compressor that like I really, really like. So I'm kind of leaning towards a couple different units for the 500 series, that is. But I think I'm going to like kind of go towards a cleaner preamp this time around to get started.
So are you leaning SSL? Are you leaning?
Yeah, so basically the main contenders right now are a Chandler TG2, which is definitely not clean.
No, but the character that is essentially pop music right now.
Yeah, like I know that's like one of the biggest pop preamps out there. Obviously a BAE 1073 still in the running. I'm kind of like weird about committing to like the 1073 sound because like I feel like it doesn't work for every vocalist.
I would want to hear it on your mic. I think that's the most important thing. I would want to hear it on your mic first.
Yeah. Well, the one I'm probably going to get is the Neve 511 because it's a super, super clean preamp, but then it has a silk function. It's labeled as texture and it lets you blend in some saturation. And it sounds nearly identical to a 1073. I compared them side by side, and it was super, super close to the point where I literally only went for the 1073 clone because I like the EQ on it. So
yeah, no, that's a good point. And I feel like
it's also cheaper.
Yeah, that's the other thing. So
it's almost $400 cheaper than
I was going to say
two preamps.
A huge difference between the normal rack units and another reason why you would go 500 series is the 500 series are like a quarter of the price sometimes of the normal units.
What's funny though is, so if you were to get a Chandler TG2 and then the Chandler EQ and then a 2-space rack or a 3-space, depending on which, you're almost at the same price as the Chandler, like the rack mount one, and you get more EQ options in the rack mount one. So like it just depends on what you're getting. And so I wouldn't really recommend just to like get a 500 series just to buy everything from the same brand because there's probably a channel strip they make that does it all already.
The cool thing up front that is the 500 series, especially with vocal chains, is the ability for it to be modular, for you to mix and match. Oh, I want the Chandler preamp, but I like the EQ on the Neve, right? I like the Neve. I like the top end on the Neve EQ, and then I want to go CL1B style compression.
Which I've been trying to find, and it's really hard.
yeah, exactly. But or maybe you want to go 1176 style compression, right?
Yeah.
And like they make those as options, and then you're kind of piecing together and this is something else when we'll talk about. I think we can kind of move into the mentality aspect of it, but the building your 500 series stuff that way, and even building out your rack units or your vocal chain in general kind of says a lot about you as a vocal producer and like the way that you do things.
Yeah. And so like, I think what it basically boils down to whenever you're doing vocals is like how like transparent is your microphone, how transparent is your preamp, and then how transparent is your compressor. Because it's like if all three of those things are super clean, like if you're running like say like something that's super sparkly like a Ref C or even this BH2 into you know, like a super clean preamp and then running that into a super clean compressor, then you're better off just using your Apollo 9 out of 10 times.
Yeah, exactly.
Like you're not going to notice a huge difference, especially if it's Apollo. You know, and so like that's something like right now I'm using the Neve preamp from Apollo, and then I'm using the 1176 SE. So side by side, there isn't going to be like a massive difference. Where I tend to like after comparing this stuff throughout each session that I do, I notice the biggest differences that I find are with compressors and EQs. So I'm trying to like just get a preamp that's going to work with most things, you know?
Yeah.
And so, you know, like a 511 would be a great choice because it's flexible. It has a high pass filter on it too, which is great. And then from there, now you have your choice of, you know, what kind of EQ do you want? Well, I really want a Pultec style EQ. Sorry, my dryer is going off. And then like, you know, what kind of compressor do I want? Well, at the studio, I typically use a Retro Instruments style level, which is a pretty dirty compressor, but you're able to hit at like negative 20 dB gain reduction on the slow settings. And it sounds like the mic came that way. So Retro Instruments makes a 500 series compressor called the Double Wide, which I believe is modeled after its 176, not the style level. But so you're able to still get that vibe. They also make a preamp that gives you the same heaviness that you get out of their compressors, but then you can run a cleaner compressor with it. So it's really cool having all these different options. And what I've kind of boiled it down to is like finding your starting point. And then after that, it's like, well, you can always build more of these.
Yeah. Well, you know? And the other thing is like knowing I think this is a big thing, is knowing what you want out of your vocal chain, right? So a lot of times you might think that you want to move in one direction and then you might backpedal. I know you've had that, you know, move where you like, I think I want a really bright mic, or maybe I want a darker mic and I want to do all of my brightening in post or with a EQ, like an outboard EQ, kind of figuring out all of that. And the cool thing about the 500s and really all of this in general is testing out what you like, getting the mic set first. Do you want bright vocals? Do you want dark vocals? It's a lot of it's dependent on what you do. I know you specifically like really bright stuff. You want a very pop sound. But you also want a sound that is uniquely you, right?
Yeah. And so like that's something that I've really realized as I keep switching it up every time I go back to track vocals. It's like my goal is for the most transparent sound. Like I want the vocalist to sound like they're in the room with you. So like, yeah, like I want a brighter vocal because like I want that feeling that they're like singing into your ear most of the time for like the more upfront stuff. So like all it takes is for you to like move that high end EQ once on a not so ideal microphone. And all of a sudden you're just like, oh my God, like I need to like rethink this. Because I did that and it was a blast running a ton of de-essers and EQ to try to fix it whenever I was mixing the song.
Yeah.
So, you know, right now it's just how can I get enough like saturation without it being too much? And then how can I get enough compression without it being too much? And how can I get it to be the type of compression that I want it to be?
Yeah. And like I said, finding that flavor and then figuring out ways to, I think this is what you were saying by the preamp thing, but finding ways to accentuate that flavor, right? So finding a flavor of whatever you like, try a bunch of different compressors through, maybe you want to go clean preamp, and then let's hit preamp and compressor first, right? And then, so you get a clean preamp and you try a bunch of different, very heavy-handed, very different sounding compressors. And then you find one that you really, really like. All right, cool. Now let's either swap out that preamp, or maybe you like the preamp, but let's like try a couple of our options to see if we can like make that compressor sound even better, right? Or maybe we stick with the preamp because we like it clean, just in case we want to change it out for other stuff. But then we find an EQ that like accentuates that compressor maybe even more, and kind of elevates it. That's where, like, that's the kind of the mentality I think that we're talking about when we're talking about vocal chains as a whole. We're kind of going for that, like, let's build the thing. So like you said, Benny Blanco's chain because he's like, I always use this, right? Like you want to build Josh's chain. That's like, I will always use this. This is the go-to.
And so like there's like a few different like configurations I'm leaning towards right now, but ultimately like I think what's important is like figuring out like how you like to work with it, because whenever I get a vocal, like I want it to basically be 90% of the way there. I don't want to have to compress too much more. I don't want to have to like DS a ton. Mm-hmm. So like that's wherever like saturation comes into play. And then I also don't want to have like a super boomy bass, or like I don't want the compression to be off. Mm-hmm. Like how I was talking about the retro, like I want it to sound like the mic came that way.
Yeah.
So, it's tough, like making those decisions without actually sitting down and like playing around with it. The one thing I do know is I hate whenever a vocal is super, super inconsistent. And then I also hate whenever vocals are so overbaked that like you can hear the expansion. I wasn't sure what I was hearing, so I put this in the group chat. Best example is the latest Skrillex song with Justin and Don Toliver on it.
Okay.
And
I'll have to go listen to that one.
Justin's vocal is like perfect. It's like the ideal vocal.
Bro, he's got a great chain. Speaking of a good vocal chain, that's Benny's chain, I think. Mm-mm. But is that not Benny's chain? Who's he tracking?
Josh Goodwin tracks his stuff.
Oh, that's right. Josh Goodwin tracks his stuff.
They typically use like a C800 or a 251 on them. I don't know what it is, but regardless, like
Josh's chain is sick. If you want a good vocal chain, listen to that.
And he's the best mixing engineer in the world.
For real.
If you listen to his vocals, you could hear every transient in the top end without it being aggressive. Mm-hmm. And whenever Dawn comes in, it sounds like it's just completely squashed. And there's this weird like sustain in the high end of the vocal because it's so squashed. And I was informed that is called expansion that I am hearing.
Oh, where it's like bumping everything up in the top end because it's compressing everything else down.
Yes.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah. So my goal is to just make it sound as natural as possible. And that's kind of hard to do sometimes because with 500 series, sometimes there is a pretty solid trade-off with the convenience of it, and it doesn't always sound the way that the rack gear does.
True.
So it's kind of tough.
Yeah.
What I've been finding is, just trying to balance clean versus saturation and going from there. But I think, a lot of people overthink these things. I think a lot of people don't think about them enough. Like there's a guy in the Matt Rad Discord. He was like, I have this almost $4,000 microphone. And like, it's just this weird mid-range that I don't like. And it's because he was running a U87 into a 1073. So he was running a mid-heavy microphone.
Into a mid-heavy preamp. That'll do it.
The BH2 I'm talking into right now sounds really good through a 1073 because it's so bright. Mm-hmm. I have no clue what my Lewitt will sound like.
Yeah.
For those who don't know, I don't have my Lewitt. I left it in Atlanta. So I'm coming back to get it.
We'll be back together in couple weeks.
This could be so much fun, dude.
I know, dude. So I am a person, unlike Josh, who has a very simple vocal chain, but I am not a vocal producer, so I also approach vocals from a very different way, right? So Josh is, I would consider, more of a true vocal producer, where he's like, I want to produce out the track, but I'm going to track your vocal the way I want it to be tracked, and I want to bake my sound into it.
Yeah,
right?
I'm weird about vocals, man. I've had people hit me up for remote work lately, and I'm like, is there any way you could come here, or like I could come out to you? Because like I can't handle this, man. They're gonna be like, oh, I have a buddy who could do it, and they're gonna go cut it on an SM7, and I'm gonna get the vocal, and I'm just gonna be like, you know what? Here's a refund.
Yeah. So I very much am a stickler for. I have my vocal chain, which my vocal chain is what you're hearing me through right now. It's, well, not always the SM7B. The SM7B is just my podcast vocal chain and like what I use for streaming and stuff. But it's a microphone, whatever it might be. I'm actually about to be in the market for another microphone. So I'm about to go through Josh's entire thing. I'm probably honestly going to start with the Lewitt.
You should, because you're going to love it. And we need to get them to sponsor us, because I literally want all of their mics.
And I'm gonna borrow. Lee Rouse, shout out. Said that I could use his what's it called? The microphone that works with UAD console.
The Townsend
mic. So I'm very interested. Do people sleep on that mic? I'm very interested in that microphone, for a couple different reasons, mostly for the flexibility. And that's what I'm trying to get at, is my stuff is a microphone into my Avalon VT737 SP, which is a channel strip, mono channel strip. It's preamp, compressor, EQ, all in one strip, and it is very, very clean, and I love it. Honestly, I think it's really great. I think that the EQ sounds very musical. I think the compressor is very, very subtle. I don't like baking in a ton of compression into a vocal. I like to have a really subtle vocal, more of a control like compression, just a little bit, taking off edges of stuff, making sure nothing crazy happens. And then I do all of my heavier compression in the box after the fact. So yeah, what you're hearing right now is pretty much my vocal chain, which I think sounds really good. I do a lot of hip hop, so a 7B works pretty good for hip hop stuff, for what I do. And, I make a living on it, and it sounds pretty good. But I am getting to the point now where it's starting to get out of my range, and I need to get a new vocal mic. But I'm more going for flexibility in mine, because most of what I'm doing is I have no idea who's going to be coming in. I do a bunch of different genres lately. Like, I've been doing a bunch of different stuff. So I don't like, I'm doing an EDM project. So super bright everything. But then I'm also doing like a country thing. It kind of sounds like Tyler Childers. So very like almost lo-fi country. It's very like gritty and old sounding. So I need that to sound like a really specific way. Then I've been doing some post-hardcore stuff and screaming like metalcore music and all that kind of stuff. So it runs the gambit. So I need pure flexibility, because I need to make it sound the way I need it to sound in the box. So whereas Josh is very much focusing in on, I do pretty much like pop, hyper pop, and some like R&B leaning like pop music. That's pretty much what you're kind of leaning into now. So, you're kind of gearing away from the rock and metal core stuff. So that's why you can do such a really specific vocal chain. because you're very focused. Whereas I am more of a producer that does a bunch of different stuff. So I need pure flexibility. And that's why I have a very clean, flat kind of everything channel strip. And then, just go into my Apollo, which we both use Apollos. Some people don't like them. Some people like them. If it's good enough for Kenny Beats, it's good enough for me.
Basically.
That's what I say.
But yeah, I think another thing to be said about it though is like typically people don't need these things. Like I don't
Nope.
exactly need an entire vocal chain.
Nope.
But I want to get one because it saves me time and like as a, like I don't know. I charge so much money. I feel like I should be able to produce a vocal.
Well, and that's what I was going to say.
great
Let's get
right
into
off the
like
bat.
why we would want a vocal chain in the first place, because we've talked about it a lot. Like, why would we want one in the first place?
Yeah, it really, for me, it really just comes down to like, I want that extra, like, okay, how about this? I think that software is so close nowadays that like you're only gaining like an extra 10%. Like Lewis Bell is known for plugging a C800 directly into his Apollo Twin.
And he's got his entire vocal chain, I'm pretty sure, on his console, right?
The console's for summing.
No. The UAD console. Doesn't he use a UAD?
Yeah.
Yeah. So in his UAD console, doesn't he have his whole vocal chain like digital?
I think so. I'm really not entirely sure, to be honest with you.
You can double check that course.
Also,
for that.
like, when Manny's mixing your stuff, you don't have to worry too much.
Fair.
But yeah, I mean, also like it's like a brilliant microphone. But anyway,
Yeah.
I think most of the time, like, all you should really worry about is what mic you're using, and then after that, it's just not over baking things. And if you're gonna be buying expensive gear, just make sure it's not so clean that you can get the same results from your UAD console.
Yep. Mine, I just really like the EQ, and the compressor is for. I like baking compression. I think analog compression just does sound a little better. Like you said, it's that 10%.
Yeah.
It's just that little extra something that like separates.
The only digital compressor that comes close is honestly the Slate Custom Opto.
See, and I don't have any Slate stuff, and I have no desire to have Slate stuff right now.
It's like the only compressor in my opinion.
Yeah. So I will say that's a very good point. Like, you don't really need a lot of this stuff to do anything. Like, realistically, you could just mic into interface, and then you could build your chain with plugins and have just run really low latency, like in Ableton, and just have plugins on your channel that while you're tracking.
Yeah.
It works. It's not the best way to do it or most streamlined, but I mean, why not, right? I mean, it works. If it works, it works. And if it works for you, then why I can't tell you to not do it. You know what I'm saying? It's like, if it works for you, then heck yeah, keep doing it. And till you want to change something because you think something might sound better. But we're just kind of giving all of the stuff that we've been talking about can be done in multiple different ways, right? Like, it can be done hardware, like we've been talking about. It can be done through software in Ableton or in Pro Tools or in whatever. It can be done in software, like we said, in a console, whether it's UAD, Antelope, or I think you said
Apogee.
Apogee started. Yeah. So those three, I think, are the only three that have like a console. Yeah. I think those are the only three that have like an external console. These are just like general guidelines of like how to approach a good vocal chain, why you would want one, kind of the things that make it up. There's actually one thing that we haven't talked about yet, Josh, that you use a lot in your vocal chain. That's tuning.
Oh yeah.
Because a lot of people don't even. I actually think people don't think about the fact that that's a thing. So
Yeah,
maybe talk about that a little bit, like dive into that a little bit.
Everybody loves Melodyne, but I can't stand it because I'm really bad at using it and it never sounds right to me. So 90% of the time I only use auto-tune in graph mode, and then whenever that gets to be a little bit too much, then I switch over to Very Audio and Cubase because it's just Actually, I just had to do that from the session on Sunday.
Well, I don't even mean like post tuning. I'm talking about like tracking, like tuning while you're tracking.
I don't do that. I just monitor with tune on.
See, I know no, that's what I'm talking about, monitoring with it on.
Yeah, so I use basically whenever I'm here, I'm only recording the preamp sound of my Apollo. And then all my effects and stuff like that, they aren't baked in anymore because I just run all of my tune there, so then I can monitor with tune on. It's cool because like it gives vocalists an extra confidence. It's really great for me whenever I'm exhausted and have to figure out harmonies. The only downfall to it is that naturally you're going to get much worse raw vocal takes. But if it gets people out of their head and to stop worrying about their pitch, then you're going to get a better performance.
Yeah, and that's something from a getting takes perspective is within reason, you can kind of make any vocal sound tuning wise the way it needs to sound, as long as the performance is there, as long as the delivery is there, you know what I mean? You can make it sound like whatever melody you need it to sound like, as long as it sounds like they mean it.
100%. Well, like that's another thing. Like the reason why I like to have an analog vocal chain is simply because it gets me to the finished product way quicker. And then I'm also able to spend less time, fumbling around in Ozone or whatever I'm using on my vocal. And I could spend more time like on effects because I feel like the most overlooked thing with vocals is like the actual effects. There's a really great video on YouTube of, I forget his name.
Andrew
It's the guy. No, it's the guy who did The Weeknd's last record. He's going through like all of the vocal effects, and I kid you not, he had like 20 plugins on like one Ableton rack, and like
That's sick.
Hearing it just like blew me away. Outrageous by the Audibles. I remember hearing those vocal effects, and I was like, I'm not putting enough thought into this. And so now that's something that I could do because I don't have to worry about like, oh well, let me hurry up and like mix this real quick. It's like, oh, it's in the box, it's already mixed.
Well, that's
done.
the other thing. Like watching, if you haven't watched the Songwriter doc, Josh recommended it to me. It is the Ed Sheeran documentary of them making Divide, the album that came out in, I don't remember when that album came out, but it's got a bunch of hits on it, and it's basically just Ed Sheeran and Benny Blanco traveling around writing a bunch of songs and stuff. And the cool thing about it is like the vocal chain is set. Once they have an idea and they track it, like they have instant feedback. He doesn't have to go, oh, is that compression setting right? Oh, is that EQ set? Like, oh, this sounds a little weird. You know what I mean? Like they get that instantaneous feedback of, is this part good? They track it and they hit play and see if it works. Not quite good. Let's rewrite that part. You know what I mean? It from a creative standpoint, it's like less roadblocks to get in your way so that you can just keep kind of being creative and not have to worry about the technical aspect of getting your vocal chain right.
Yep.
Yeah, I think we'll probably start to land the plane here, Josh, because we've been running for a good minute.
I'm tired.
And and you're tired. I still have some other videos to edit. So but I think some good takeaways. Let's talk about some good takeaways from this. Some good takeaways is, generally what a vocal chain is, but also, that is a thing that you can do is have a predetermined like set of plugins or rack gear or something like that to help you in speed of making like creation. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Take what I do with the Avalon, easy. Take what you do with what you're building with your 500 series, what you what you have in your Apollo setup, even if it's just something that you're monitoring through, like your Apollo setup. Just gives you that extra confidence, or to get the delivery right. You know, I feel like that's something that people don't really think about. What's something else that you want people to kind of walk away with this?
Oh man,
Walk away.
I think there's a lot. I think that like something I've been doing is like I'll bake effects in onto my inputs, so then that way, like even though it's not outboard gear, like I'm printing the plugin through my input. I don't think you could do it in Ableton. You could do it in Cubase, and I know you could do it in Logic because I got the idea from Oakfelder. I don't think you could do it in Pro Tools. Like you don't have faders for your inputs in Pro Tools, right?
No.
Yeah, so you probably can't do it in there. But basically in Cubase, I have 2 inputs plus my virtuals. They're all in my mixer, and then I will go ahead and just put on like virtual mix rack, and I'll do my EQ and then my compressor, and then I'll just bake them in to the vocal. So I'll just like track it dry, mix it to where I like it, and then just move that plugin over. So then everything is just automatically printed.
That's really cool.
Yeah, it saves me a lot of time. Plus, I really do like how custom Opto sounds. So like that's been a blast. And it's less CPU intensive. It gives you less things to mess around with. That's another like really cool thing about analog gear is like you have to commit.
Mm-hmm.
So I've been about committing constantly lately.
For sure.
As soon as I do something in MIDI, I like to print it out. Unless if I'm just like making beats for fun, then I'll just leave everything MIDI. But like whenever I'm producing or whenever I'm doing, something a little bit more serious, I'm just all about committing. And that's been really great. I feel like I'm 10 times faster now because I'm not just like going back and tweaking things constantly.
Yeah, that's especially applicable for this whole conversation is like committing early, and the idea of having a vocal the entire idea of having a vocal chain is literally committing as early as possible.
Yeah, and then I think the second thing that I think people should take away is just like you're being paid to have an extra level of attention that other people don't. And I think that on one hand you have people that obsess over things relentlessly, and it's all for nothing. Well, it's mostly all for nothing. And then I think like simple things like in an intimate song, like I want to be able to hear every transient in the top end of a vocal. Like I think that that's very, very important because like when you're talking about vocals, you're talking about how people interpret how the song feels, what the song is about. And sometimes that means it needs to sound absolutely awful, like Grief by Earl Sweatshirt. And then other times it needs to be super hi-fi and brilliant. And I think it's just important to like take those things into consideration, which is why like I want things to sound done on the way in, but I also want them to sound like transparently done. That way, after the fact, if I want to make it sound terrible, I can make it sound terrible. If I want it to sound brilliant, then it could stay where it's at.
That's a good place, I think, to end it. Josh, thanks for coming and having a conversation about vocal chains.
Always, my guy.
We'll probably come back to this in like another couple months
or something like
recording? That. Huh?
Nope. I thought Ableton stopped for a second, but it didn't. Okay.
No, I think we're gonna come back to this in like a couple months and kind of re-talk about vocal chains in a different light. As we kind of maybe we'll come back and we'll talk specifically about 500 series gear after we get to like test more of it and try more of it and stuff like that. As we're getting modular with some of this.
Yeah, I'm still not sure if like I'm ready to really make the investment just yet, but I definitely know kind of what I want right now.
But maybe that'll be a good conversation to come back to later.
Yeah, I gotta make a trip to Vintage King at some point
for sure.
do all that fun stuff.
So yeah, dude, thanks for coming and hanging. Thank you everybody for listening today. If you haven't followed us on Instagram, Josh is at Josh Writes Songs.
No more extra S's, dude.
I know, dude. I saw. Josh is at Josh Writes Songs. I'm at Music by Drew, DRU. The podcast is at Home Studio Hangout. We post some cool stuff. We share some of our past guests' content on our page. We talk about a bunch of different topics, and you can stay up to date with when new episodes drop, or when we post like funny reels, or Josh will drop some tips every now and again from Sunday Sound Design whenever he has a chance to do them. So yeah, follow us on all the socials. And once again, thank you, listener, for coming. And we will see you next week. Keep on creating. Until next time.
Bye.